I've forgotten a lot about YouTube stuff.
Okay, now I think we're good. Again, give us a few seconds, Mackie, and then start it up.
Welcome to PolyCast, episode 443. I am Makalua, and with me, as usual, Mega Bears fan.
Hello, everybody. We're back.
You
Hello,
may have to be
everybody.
handling
We're
Tyler
back. Push to talk.
and the Mian team.
Backed up so far that we are basically forwards.
Three steps backward, one step forward. I don't know.
And if you
So,
just keep going back far enough around the world, you'll be forward relative to your initial position, sort of.
sort of, kinda.
It all
So,
depends on your
listeners, we
favorite.
did not intend to be gone this long. We intended to take a holiday break, but between us co-hosts, we've had a lot of real life things and then some technical difficulties trying to get restarted. But we are back, and given life things and all that, we're going to probably be doing this as a monthly podcast instead for a while until we get everything a little bit more settled. But we are back.
What's the worst that could happen? Surely we will not get poured with news in between episodes, because that's never happened before.
Yeah, and hopefully we don't have like a new game release while, we're out on hiatus dealing with personal and technical problems. I mean, gosh, that would be awful.
Oops.
Well, speaking of news, we still have some Civ 6 stuff that we wanted to get to before we get to our Civ 7 impressions later this episode. So, there's been an ongoing problem in the Civ Players League with cheating, as a video by Herson, probably like half a year ago now, the first one, and now there's been another reveal more recently. And all this has to do, again, with starting with the map, starting with knowledge of the map that you shouldn't have, and planning perfect routes to goody huts and city states. And in the more recent case, somebody actually won money from a prize pool while doing it, most likely. It's hard to definitively say, but the evidence is pretty strong that their scouting routes are suspicious.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
It's in that stage right
But
now.
apparently there was disagreement among the moderators, and then falling out among the moderators over whether or not whether or not it was actually cheating and whether or not to enforce the cheating policies.
Yeah, so there's a good amount of drama going into the background of this, but even just the front end issue with cheating is a pretty significant problem, because to stop it, you'd probably have to cut off access to those maps that people use to view the replays uh, after a multiplayer game. Because what the players are doing is they're using that to locate the goody huts and then optimally routing their scouting to find those, or to find specific types of city states, which boost the early game pretty significantly.
Yeah.
And it is a big competitive advantage, no question.
Like,
It's like a mini map hack, because like it's not a full map hack. You don't know what your opponents are building. You don't know what they've scouted, so you're not like it's not as powerful as that kind of cheating, but it
well,
is still cheating,
I
and
don't know.
it is still
I think
giving them an advantage.
that might kind of depend, because this scandal in particular, I think the issue is they were using the turn one autosave. But I mean, I haven't used
Yeah.
these particular like mod tools to view the map, but it based on what I saw in these videos, it sounds like you could put any save from any turn and see all of the map conditions on that turn. So hypothetically, you might be able, if you're just plugging in every turn's autosave, you might be able to see what everyone else is doing. It would just be that would be a lot more work, because it takes time to pull the autosave from your computer and put it into that application, and look at everything. And most of these competitive games have a turn timer, so it's
Yeah,
probably just not practical to do that level of cheating.
Mm-hmm.
that's true. Plus, most of the information that's relevant you get from the turn, like from the first turn. Yeah, the only benefit you would get from using future ones would be like updating to see if other players have already claimed the goody huts. But it's not like the city state locations would have changed or anything like that. And the map isn't giving, like, that tool isn't giving you info about like what other players are building in their cities or that kind of thing. Uh, so like the utility of doing it later wouldn't be as great, and you're now on a timer where it's going to compromise your turns. So that's probably why cheaters are only using the starting save file.
And one
But
of
yeah,
the
from what you're saying, yeah, it's probably possible to keep doing it. It's just that it doesn't help
yeah,
the way that
right,
cheating with the turn one save file.
and it sounds like one of the dead giveaway tells that you can possibly observe in real time is in at least in the original video that was posted, the person who was accused of cheating, and who I think was eventually banned from the league. So the other moderators did agree that this person was cheating. Uh, they were taking way longer than everyone else to even begin their first turn, right? Like the game would start and they would just sit there idle for like a couple minutes, while everyone else would play their first turn. And of course, this is Civ 6, so the first turn is you've got one city to assign a build queue to, and you have one, warrior to move up to 2 spaces, and you're selecting a starting technology and a starting civic to research. Like, there's not a lot to do on turn 1 in Civ 6, so it should not be taking a player 3, 4, 5 minutes to take
Yeah, and
that
certainly
turn.
not in every game.
Right.
Although the methodology for catching the cheater had more to do with observing their scouting pathing.
Oh my gosh, the amount of work, and this was the big problem, is like, okay, like things happen, right? Maybe you start the game and suddenly, oh, nature calls, or you got a dog or a kid in the background that you got to go deal with. Like stuff like that happens. So a person being AFK for a few minutes, right? It might be a red flag, but it's not like a for sure, oh, well, this person is clearly cheating. Let's stop the game right now on turn 1. The way to find
It's the long-term pattern.
Right, yeah. The way that the person found the cheating is, and this was also something that was new to me, is it looks like you're able to take saves and replay the entire history of the game. Does the game save track every single move that every player has made throughout the game? Because that's kind of what it looked like. Maybe that's something that has to do with like the era score and the timeline feature that was added in Rise and Fall, or was that there from the beginning? I guess there is the end game replay. So it probably has to track all that stuff maybe for that. But anyway, they were able to take saves. The moderators were able to take saves from the end game and apparently replay the entire game and see not only the entire map, but also be able to see like what each player was supposedly able to see. And basically they found that, this person's scouts would take the optimal path to goody huts and city states, and depending on the person's strategy, they would go straight for either like scientific or religious city states and take the shortest, most optimal path to meet those city states in order to get the free envoys and so forth, and the free yields that they give. So that's a very long, laborious, labor intensive process that some moderator has to do, because these games take hours to play, so it probably also takes hours to go through this footage.
And you really need more than one person to do that too, because like you have like what would be optimal to a good player if they don't have complete information of the map. Like you'd still want to reveal as many tiles as possible, make as much progress as possible with your scouts. But like in some cases, people wouldn't fully agree on what the optimal move would be. Like some cases it's obvious, sometimes it's not. But what made the cheaters really suspicious is that they would very frequently skip very obvious moves that would reveal more land and like go into rough terrain with no evidence that the terrain would clear up again or whatever, just to get a goody hut sooner. And like it isn't just that they made suboptimal scouting moves. It's that every single suboptimal scouting move they did was rewarded because they knew the goody huts are there. Because if you just had like a beginner just scouting around suboptimally, they wouldn't be getting more than their share of goody huts every game. They'd be getting less on average, whereas these players are getting way more. And same thing with Auto Explorer. Auto Explorer is hot garbage when it comes to optimizing your early game find.
To the point
So
where
there's no way that they were like just lucking into this. Like the consistency of which they found the goody huts and the fact that they like beeline straight to them made it pretty obvious that they had pre-knowledge of where this stuff was.
and the auto explorer is so bad that the moderators felt like they could tell the turn that a player turns on auto explore, because with in competitive play with a time limit, right, you find the things you want to find with your scouts, and then you just set them on auto explore because you don't necessarily have the time. If there's like a 5 or 6 or 10 minute turn timer, you don't necessarily have the time to go through and manually move every single scout. If you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 scouts out there, you find the things you want to find, you find the things that you expect to be out there, and then you just put it on auto explore just to reveal more of the map. But yeah, there are, in competitive play, there is broad consensus on like what are like optimal moves in certain situations. Like the things you want to do, according to these high level competitive players, is you always want to reveal as many tiles as possible on a turn with your scout, which means following flat lands so that you can move all 3 spaces in a turn, with some exceptions, maybe about being able to get up onto a hill to get more visibility of nearby. Like if you're in a rough area and you can't see past nearby hills, then maybe getting up on top of the hill to see past those, would be considered a good move. And these players would just not do those things. Like they would just wander their scouts into things that, from their perspective, could just be dead ends, right? Which is a horribly not optimal thing to do, because then not only do you not reveal very much of the map, but then you also have to backtrack that scout, back out of that dead end, which wastes even more turns in which you are not revealing parts of the map. And these sorts of things would be the kinds of giveaways that the moderators were looking for.
Yeah, they'd be
Yeah,
heading it.
apparently it was not just one guy doing it, but a number of them, and it's now unclear how many people are doing it versus not, because it's not like you can manually check everyone, and without looking at saves, it's hard to notice that somebody is suspicious while you're like playing in a game with.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
unless
and
like everyone's on a stream and someone's watching a stream and is like, this stuff looks suspicious and reports it, or if the moderators are watching the streams, like maybe hypothetically you could be, oh, this kind of looks suspicious, but like you can't know, right? Like I don't think they're going to stop the game in order to investigate right then and there,
and
Yeah,
even then, if they wanted to go back and look at each individual game, it's the time and effort that would take to look at that. And then I think it would only come up in when they're doing the for money tournaments. That might be the time when they want to put more scrutiny on it. But that's not going to stop these people from doing it all the time, and the amount of mod effort to catch them.
well, plus
Uh,
who gets into the foreign money tournaments is people who are performing well.
yeah,
So like you could cheat your way into the foreign money tournament and then not cheat. Like that's still
yeah. You
that
still
that's
might.
still extremely far from ideal.
Well, and you're
Yes.
potentially taking spots in those tournaments away from people who were playing in good faith, right? Who
Yeah.
then were lower
Hmm.
ranked than you because they weren't cheating. And this is the exact same reason why things like steroids, right, are banned in sports, right? Because then everybody has to take it to be back on equal competitive footing with one another, and you don't necessarily want that. I don't know. I mean, maybe some people want just all of our sports to be nothing but supermen beating the crap out of each other, but uh, you
And
know,
yet, still, even with all that, people still do cheating and taking those things and find ways to get doped up.
Yeah.
right. And this was also interesting to us, from a strategic standpoint, because it really does expose how
Mm.
strategically important effective scouting is at the beginning of the game. Because again, these are competitive, competition tournament players. These are the best of the best Civ multiplayer players, and even they are getting noticeable competitive advantages from just being able to see the entire map at the start of the game. Like not even being able
Well,
to
that's
see.
not. It's the tangible benefits from the goody huts and the city states that's making it worth it. Were it not for those, I don't think you'd see as much of an emphasis on scouting. I think you would actually see different build orders if huts and city states were off.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
for
because you'd want to scout out the area just around you, so you knew where you were going to settle close by, so you'd have that bit of map exposed to see resources. But if there's no city states to contact and get the bonuses from, if there's no giddy huts out there, you don't really want to push too far past that, because you want to. Those are turns you could use to be building settlers and builders, and
You just look at
improving.
Era score from Discovering
Yeah,
Natural Wonders, but yeah, the you would probably see less of an emphasis on getting the scouting done as opposed to other things. It's
right.
another interesting thing that makes the what the top players are doing happen this way is that they're playing with online speed, and because of how the builders and settlers cost scaling goes up, it doesn't make a lot of sense to conquer people before they get tile improvements down, because then you would have to pay for the builders yourself to improve those cities. So, like in contrast to other Civ games or even a lot of other games generally, the early game conquest incentive isn't there. Later on, that changes.
Yeah, playing on
Yeah,
online
even
speed
even
changes a lot.
Yeah,
I
but I mean,
and
like that conquest thing is huge because like because it's generally in free for all, it's generally a bad deal to try to conquer someone, even if you're successful. Like it hurts your chances of winning. People are much less afraid and disrespect the threat of early game rushes as opposed to other formats like 2v2, where getting one of your teammates like shredded right at the start is basically game over. Then you have to respect the early aggression a great deal. And you see player builds change as a consequence of this, even at the top levels.
and even in our co-op multiplayer games where we're trying to take over an AI, we sit there and wait for a good point where we can build a nice strong army, and we're always saying, "Oh, thank you for building that wonder for me," you know?
Well,
Yeah, and
that's a little different against the AI
I
for
know,
sure.
but it is similar thought process. Unless we're really lucky and we spawn really close to somebody and we have an early era unit to go against them with, it's going to be mid game at least before taking an AI out.
Eh, just kill 'em with horses. It's
yeah.
fine.
And on top of that, I think also in these competitive tournament games, like barbarians are disabled as well. So that's
Mm,
also one less
yes.
thing that you have to, worry about in terms of defending your city. Because even if you're not worried about other players, building an army and coming and conquering you, like on turn 10 of the game, you still are probably building an extra warrior and a slinger, you know, early in the game just to defend yourself from nearby barbarians. And you don't have to do that in these competitive tournaments. So you can build 2, 3, 4 scouts and then a settler, right? And not have to be as. And I even saw, like, one of the things that blew my mind was watching these competitive tournament players sending settlers out unescorted to go settle cities, right? Because they don't have barbarians and they know the
Yeah.
other players aren't building, and sending out actual military units.
I wonder though. I'm sure every now and then someone gets their settler sniped if they're too cavalier about.
Yeah, they might cross
Yeah, but
paths with a I guess very fortunate enemy scout, who might then
uh-huh.
capture the because great scouts can capture civilian units in Civ
Yep.
6, right? Yeah.
I, yeah, I find it interesting that that they disable barbarians but do not disable goody huts, considering the luck factor from both of those. Because I would presume that the reason that they turn barbs off is that like there's some luck with how early you get scouted. Sometimes it's just impossible to prevent a scout from sending an encampment attack at you
Yeah, it
because
is too
it
easy to
scouts you
get
so early. But
it's
there's
too easy.
also the era score aspect of it too, where like somebody can be screwed out of getting opportunities to get Eureka's and era score from farming the barbarians in addition. So that can go in both ways. So you can get a pretty big swing there in terms of early game advantage or disadvantage. But that's
Yeah,
also
because
true
it
for goody huts. Like you can get a builder, which is an incredible value, especially because of how builder cost scales. Like getting that freebie builder does not move you up one on the counter. You just get a free builder. So and that's true for stealing them from other players too, by the way. So that's great. And then
yeah,
you
it
or
is.
you could get like something that's like worth almost nothing.
And it really is far too easy if you have barbs on to get barb swarmed because it happened in those more co-op games. A lot of times, sometimes it'll be the AI storm, but sometimes it's one of the players that gets the bad luck to spawn next to where like there's two barb camps early on, and that's all they do through that first age is trying to fight off the barbs. So this is why they turn that off. But then it's like Phil's asking, why did you not turn these goody huts off? Because that will swing it. Because if you get because you can get the tech and civic boosts out of them. You can get super early gold or super early faith that lets you get a pantheon early. There's so many things that's making variables. Why is that not eliminated to reduce that?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think Civ 6 seems like it's probably uh, the the most benefit. It probably has the strongest early game scouting, probably
Mm.
of any Civ game because of all of the different rewards that you get. Like in older Civ titles, like there were the goody huts, and like that was it, right? But in Civ 6, it's also free envoys from city states, which gives you yields in districts. It's the Eureka text bonuses, um, and it's it's the natural wonders, and then yeah, it's era score, which then contributes to early game golden ages.
Yeah, I didn't realize how important those were early on. It changes the rest of your game if you hit that first golden age or not, pretty substantially. And maybe that's why they want the goody huts and stuff because it makes it more possible to do it. I don't know. You'd have to ask them why they leave them on. But I do find it interesting because those are both pretty significant RNG factors. I mean, even city states are, but so many civs depend on them for bonuses that you'd have to make an even more balanced rework adjustments than they already have if you were to get rid of city states. It would be
Oh
very
yeah,
difficult.
I mean there would be multiple civs and leaders that would just be not viable at all to play in
Hmm.
competitive if city states were disabled. I wonder if for Civ 5 tournament level play, if there was barbarians would have been enabled, because I know there were at least a couple of um, civilizations or leaders, like I think Germany, like had bonuses for barbarians. So if you disabled barbarians in Civ 5 competitive play, like Germany would potentially be rendered unviable.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be as impactful though. And there's already civs that are basically not viable unless you change them in balance, just because their bonuses aren't worth as much. Like, there's no way anybody like playing Civ 4 would run America. It'd just be nonsense if you're like trying to do PvP, unless you're just styling on someone.
Okay,
So
so
I wonder how they'll fix that. If they'll just like give everyone access to it,
oh, and
or
also
if they like remove that as an option.
yeah. Also, I see that there's some complaints in the chat about like beeping. I think I know what that is. I think it is a chime from when I use my push to talk, and it's making sounds on the desktop. I'm not
Ah,
sure how to disable that chime in Discord, so I don't know if there's anything that I can do about that right now. So that's something that I will have to troubleshoot offline before the next recording. So in the meantime, I apologize if that's distracting. Hopefully, I can try to eliminate it in post when we put up the edited episode on YouTube, but maybe not.
you could leave a mic open maybe for this episode.
I could, but I also have a toddler running around and watching
Mm.
TV in the background, so I don't think that's going to be any better.
I was going to say he'd have even more to edit out.
Trade offs, yeah. Well, yeah, at least the beeps are consistent when it comes to editing. It's the same sound, so you can like remove things that are like that sound.
Yeah, so I guess I could maybe also mute my desktop audio, like when I'm about to push to talk, but then that might also mute, one of you two if you're talking. But whatever, I'll troubleshoot it later offline. But in the meantime, sorry. So do we have anything else that we want to talk about for the cheating scandals, or are we ready to talk about the big topic of the day?
Now let's talk about the big thing.
All right. Well, the big thing, of course, is that we have a new Civilization game now. Civilization 7 released. It's been, what's it been, 2-3 weeks now already?
Hmm.
February 11th. Yeah, it's already been almost a month. And
Already been patched.
it's already, yes, that, well, I mean, gosh, it was patched like 2 days. uh, into the game's launch. Was there also a day 1 patch too, and then a day 3 patch, or was it just the day 2 or day 3? But
I don't remember. I just
anyway,
remember they were quickly after the game dropped.
right. Anyway, I have had a chance to play the game a little bit, so I have lots and lots of impressions. I think the two of you have some impressions as well. So far, I'm seeing a lot of mixed reception to the game. There are some people who are saying it's really good. There's people who are saying, they like absolutely hate it and they're going to keep playing Civ 6, or in some cases even Civ 5. But I do want to point out that I don't think there's ever been a Civ launch that was not somewhat rocky. And in particular, if we all remember, I think a lot of people forget how rough the Civ 5 launch was.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't forgotten. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted to point that out too. That each time we've changed to a new Civ, there have always been a group of people that just don't like the changes that have been made and want to stay behind the old one. It's always a little bumpy through the first few months and before the first DLCs start coming out and stuff like that. It
I was
happened with
among
4
those
to
people.
5, with 5 to 6, and now it's happening with 6 to 7. The sky is not falling. Calm down.
I was among those people in 5, but also with 5, there was much more tangible criticisms. Like, we could not play Civ 5
Oh,
multiplayer
oh yeah.
initially. Like, it was not an option. It didn't work, period. So we
Yeah,
kept playing Civ 4 in our multiplayer games because we just Civ 5 was
5
not an
was just
option
like,
when it
nope.
was patched.
But also, like, Civ 5, just like the balance and the scaling of things was just totally off. Like, there was so so little production on the map, and so little that you could do to improve your production, and everything was so expensive. Like, it took forever to get things done. Like, building a unit, on standard game speed might take 10 or 15 turns. It was ridiculous. Like, and I remember playing early games of Civ 5 where like losing a single unit in war was absolutely crippling because it took so long to get a replacement unit built and then to also move it out, to the front lines. Like, the war would be over by the time that happens. So yeah, there were so many issues with Civ 5 at launch. And Civ 7, the big thing, the big elephant in the room, the thing that I think is getting the most mixed reception is, of course, this new ages system. So for those of you who don't know or haven't played the game yet, I'm assuming everyone listening probably has some exposure to how Civ 7 works if you haven't played it yourself. The game's basically divided up into 3 mini games. And I, from the moment this was announced, I got Spore vibes from it. That made me cringe a little. If anyone remembers the game Spore by Will Wright, that came out in like the early 2000s, that was basically like 4 or 5 like mini games, none of which were particularly
start out as
good.
a cell. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got Spore vibes from some of the early information about Civ 7. I want to say, for the record, Civ 7 is not that bad. Civ 7 is not the train wreck that Spore was at launch. I think Spore got better too. Like, I think it actually developed like a cult following eventually. But the big thing is that when you complete an age in Civ 7, there is kind of a soft reset. It's similar to like Humankind. The civilization that you're playing changes in between each age, and like it's actually to the point where when you go from one age to another, the game actually takes you back out to like a setup lobby for you to pick a new civilization, and then you actually have to sit through a loading screen to load back into the game. So it really does feel like you are just starting a new game with an advanced start setting on. And this has been really divisive amongst players because on the pros, this arguably puts everybody back on a somewhat more even playing field because everybody comes back to being in tech and civic parity with one another. And so it potentially makes the game more competitive throughout the mid and late game, arguably, but you still do have, some of the advantages that you accumulated from the earlier ages. Like, you get special legacy bonuses that you carry over, and then on top of that, like, you keep cities that you built. Like, some of them get downgraded back to towns, and you keep armies that you had constructed. So if you were kicking butt in terms of cities and had a massive army, like, you keep most, if not all of that, going into a new age. But basically everybody starts over on the tech tree.
Yeah, the advantages are still pretty solid between ages, from what I can tell.
Right.
But
So
then I don't have the game.
yeah, I
Yeah, from what I've seen
personally.
in
Oh, go ahead, Mackie.
what I've seen in longer playthroughs where people are going through all the ages, it does sort of mitigate the old snowballing effect where once you got to critical mass, you just could not be stopped. It's not that you can't get close to that in here, but it is, you got to work for it a bit more because you have to think about knowing what you're potentially going to lose in an age transition. You have to think about getting everything into your army so you can keep that, figure out where you want, because I see a lot of times people switch capitals because that way they get to keep the other old capital as a free city. So that's less. Yeah, there's just little tricks
Oh,
and
is
things.
is that the benefit of switching the capital? I saw that option and I was like, why would you want to do this unless like a bunch of crap in your capital got like raised or something just before the end of the age? I wasn't even sure what the point of that
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of players using that for a strategy, just as a common thing. Just swap it over there, and maybe for the third age, you swap back to the original capital. You know, so it is not as ridiculous snowballing. Not that there aren't weird exploits and things where you can't absolutely crater everybody else's research rates. Because I've seen some. I hope things I hope get patched. All right, train of thought just lost. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
who's going?
I was playing a lot of Ara History Untold, leading up to the launch of Civ 7, and I think the two of them make for like an interesting case study in terms of how these ages work, because Ara is also divided up into like 3 acts. They call it acts in Civ 7, their ages. But I think I kind of like the way that Ara handles it a little bit better. And the way that Ara does it is when a large enough subset of the players in the game reach a particular era threshold, then it triggers an act progression, similar to how going into a new era worked in Civ 6 with like the era score and stuff like that. And then what happens is at the end of the age, the civilizations or the cultures or nations or whatever the heck Ara called them that have the lowest score are removed from the game. And all of their old cities and districts and stuff become like ruins, and all of their old units like basically become barbarians. And what this does is it frees up a bunch of map space for the players who are competitive to go and settle more cities and expand a little bit. And it also opens up, a second and a third stage of exploration where there's a mad rush to send your scouts out to where all those old civilizations used to be in order to get the ancient ruins, which similar to civilization provide you with yields and resources and other bonuses. What I don't like about the way that Ara handles it is that these civilizations completely collapse and disappear off the map like overnight. Like, the turn before the act ends, all of the civs are there. They all have cities, they all have units, and then you press next turn. You get a pop up that shows everyone's score and where everyone ranked, and then the next turn starts, and like a bunch of civilizations are just gone. It would be nice if there was like a period of gradual decline for those civilizations, and I think that's one of the things that Civ 7 kind of introduces, is because at the end of each age in Civ 7, there's the crisis that happens for different. Does every player in Civ 7 have the same crisis, or is it unique for each player? That's something I'm not sure about. But so I think if Aura were to have something like a crisis, where whether or not you progress into the next act would have been determined by your success or failure at handling that crisis, like maybe that could have been a little bit better than just, you know, clicking next turn and suddenly a bunch of civilizations, or maybe even your civilization, if you were performing poorly, are kicked out of the game. And then Civ 7, in contrast, like the act or the age transitions don't have the same continuity that the act transitions in Aura have, because again, in Aura, like the start of the next act is just the next turn, but in Civ 7, like when someone meets the criteria for ending an age, the age just ends. Like there's not even, frustratingly, there's not even like a countdown to like tell you how many turns you have left before the age ends. So if there's something you were doing, like trying to befriend a city state or build a wonder or something like that, you don't know if you're going to be able to finish that in time for the age to end.
There's a percentage up in the upper left corner, so you know that you're getting closer. But sometimes, if the AI hits its legacy thresholds before you do, and I have seen in some people's games jump from being in the 80 something to jump to 100,
like
because
98.
like multiple AIs have done the thing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
80. It's 80%, and then it's 98%, and then
Yeah.
2 turns later it's
Then, oh, crap.
99%, and then 2 turns after that it's 100%, and it's age transition. Yeah. Yeah, I can vouch that for sure is the way it works, and that is immensely frustrating. And like again, like that was solved in Civ 6. Like even Civ 6, there was a timer telling you how many turns there were left in the current
Yes.
era before the era transition happens, so you could try to get any last minute era score or something. And then of course in Civ 6, the game didn't soft reset between eras, where the things you might have
roll over.
Yeah, where the things you might have been working on like are terminated, right? Because like you when you start the new age in Civ 7, right, if you were 2 turns away from building a wonder, well, you just didn't build that wonder, and now you don't have an opportunity to build that wonder because you have a completely new tech tree that has different wonders on it, and you don't even have access to the old wonders. And like just depending on how quickly players rush through the goals for a particular age, you could end an age like very early, and then when you skip to the next age, it's at a predetermined like date on the game's calendar, and it potentially skips like large chunks of history, and it skips a lot of transitional periods. Like you don't have Civ 7 doesn't have that transitional period like between like the Renaissance and the Industrial era, where you just unlocked coal, or you just unlocked iron, or not iron, oil, or you just unlocked niter or saltpeter or whatever for gunpowder units, and then there's you're looking for places to settle. It's just, no, you start the age, and those resources are just on the map, and if they're in your territory, they're improved and accessible to you.
Yeah, because you go from what's like the normal first couple of ages in a Civ 6 game, where you're in antiquity and that, and then you suddenly jump to the exploration. You've got caravels and everything else. It's like, what? And then you suddenly jump forward to all of the industrial stuff is built, and you're already starting to build railroads. And it's I think it shows up. I think to me it feels like it shows up more between antiquity and exploration than it does between exploration into industrial. But yeah, there's this missing bit, and I don't know if I don't think they're going to come back and slot in new ages in between, because I think I think there was stuff in the code people found. There was an atomic age they didn't get to yet. So, yeah.
The
a little bit awkward.
The final age currently ends like basically with the invention of rocketry. And
yeah, like, it stops at the Apollo program. It's like,
I don't even think it gets that
excuse
far.
me,
I think it stops at Sputnik.
It's the first. Is it?
I
thought so. It was Apollo, but it's so early in the actual compared to our real world. It's like, excuse me, the traditional Civ space race victory is going to Alpha Centauri or to an exoplanet. What is this?
Yeah. So so right now the modern era of Civ 7, doesn't include computers. It doesn't include the internet. It doesn't have, it doesn't have nuclear power. I mean, it barely even has nuclear weapons, right? Because like the way it kind of works is
It's at the very end.
developing a nuclear weapon requires you to like complete the end game goal for a military victory, and then you have to do one more project in order to actually win the game with a military victory. But building a nuclear weapon costs like almost the same or exactly the same amount of turns as building the project that just ends the game. So, like, you don't really have time to build nuclear weapons and actually use them to, swing the game one way or another. Like, basically, you use them out of spite, right? Like, you have one turn left, and it's just like, well, I'm going to win the military victory next turn anyway. I might as well drop all my nukes.
That's how I've seen it when people have done. It's like, and because you were so annoying 2 eras ago, have a nuke.
Right, yeah. This is for that time
Which
you
is
forward settled me in the antiquity era.
yes.
Take this.
This is literally on the city you forward settled me with. Get wrecked.
Now they could break a tie between two people pursuing military, right? At least.
Maybe
Or
you'd because I haven't done a military victory myself, so I'm still a little bit vague on how it works. But I think the way it works is you get like a project to so you unlock like nuclear weapons, and then the actual victory is, or sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. You unlock the Manhattan Project, and then you complete the Manhattan Project, and then at that point you can optionally build nuclear weapons if you want. But once the Manhattan Project is completed, you win the game by completing Operation Ivy, which is a wonder that you build in one of your cities. So if you wanted to swing the game one way or another by nuking someone, you would probably have to nuke the city that is building Operation Ivy in order to slow down the production that goes to that. And that would otherwise...
I did not realize you won a military victory by building a wonder. What the heck?
I know, very strange in a sense.
I haven't done the military victory, but that's my understanding from the other people who I've talked to who have played a military victory. So yes,
Yeah,
that is.
and the couple of
That is,
ones I've seen played where they got to that, yeah, it was basically doing that. I was like, what happened to domination, or at least taking the capitals or something? It feels weird.
yeah, that's awkward.
Well, I think that also does win the game. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you're the last Civ standing, hopefully
Oh,
that
sure, that
ends
yeah.
the game and you don't have to go through the motions of building the Manhattan Project and Operation Ivy. Hopefully.
That's fine and all, but why are you getting a military victory for building a wonder? You should either win some other victory condition by developing your civ sufficiently, or you go beat everyone down.
Well, that wonder is being the first to develop thermonuclear weapons. So, I mean, it's at least it's a wonder that makes sense for, being a something that would be, a declaration of we have won in military. Like, you can't stop us because we've got all the thermonukes.
That doesn't make sense, though. Like, making the ability to make thermonukes, or even having a fair few, does not a world conquest to me.
Well, it does, however, make more sense if there were an atomic age after that, and that were just the threshold for transitioning to the atomic age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would make sense. But awarding a military victory for not using your military to conquer people does not make sense.
Yeah, well, and this is why I said this age system is going to be the most controversial system in the game. Like, I think by a landslide. I mean, there's other things that are controversial or getting mixed reactions too, but this is the big one.
Yeah, for me it isn't. For me, it's the UI. The UI is why I didn't get the game. Full stop. I've had enough annoyances with Civ 5 and Civ 6's UI to launch a downgrade from 6 to 7 and be like, nah, that's okay.
Yeah,
I already suffer through crap like Hearts of Iron 4's UI. I don't need another trash can control set to be frustrated with all the time. I'll just wait.
and
Hopefully they do fix it.
And players,
because people have said in Reddit that, like, oh no, they'll fix it over time. I'm like, well, did they fix it in 5 and 6? No. I mean, some people think the Civ 6 UI is fine. I strongly disagree. And if that's the standard, like if the best Civ 7 gets is to be as good as Civ 6, I am unimpressed. Like to the point where I don't respect that as a design choice even. It's so bad.
Yeah, and
It is so bad.
a lot of players are going to blame the UI issues on the fact that the game was also developed for, consoles and that sort of stuff. But there are things that even in that regard, I think are pretty egregious UI issues. Like for example, when the game first launched, I don't know if they fixed this yet. There are no tooltips for hovering over like anything. Like
Yeah, that's rough.
and
Yeah.
like one of the ones like just as soon as I hadn't even gotten into a game yet, I was in the setup lobby trying to decide what difficulty level I wanted to set the game to, and they changed the names of most of the difficulty levels. So like instead of having like Prince and Noble or whatever, it's like Viceroy and Sovereign, but there is no tooltip or anything that tells you like what those difficulty settings change or which is the default difficulty. The game defaults to, I forget what the difficulty level is called. I want to say Governor, and it's the second easiest difficulty out of like 6. Like that's the default. And because there's 6 difficulty settings as opposed to like 5 or 7, there is no like difficulty setting right in the middle that you would assume would be like the normal or medium difficulty setting, and then you go to easy or hard from there. So it's like, okay, well, which do I want, the 3rd difficulty or the 4th difficulty, or can I even go up to the 5th difficulty, right, for my first game? Because the game doesn't tell you anything about what each difficulty setting changes or what is even considered an easy mode or a medium mode or a hard mode.
Yeah, apparently people had to back engineer how trade routes work too, because the game doesn't actually tell you on release. I don't know if it does now.
I struggled with that too. So there is, I think, a tutorial thing that comes up at one point that tells you how to do it, but it's one of those things where, like in my experience anyway, my first playthrough of the game, I saw the tutorial tip before I was actually ready to actually send. I think what happened was it gives you the tutorial tip on how to use trade routes when you unlock the ability to construct merchants, but then you have to spend like 5 or 10 turns or whatever actually building the merchant unit. And then by the time I had done that, I kind of forgot what the tutorial tooltip had told me to do, and I couldn't find a way. Maybe there is a way to go back and look at the old tutorial tips. I didn't see it at that point, but I couldn't figure out how to do it because it puts up a menu of all the cities, all the foreign cities that your trader can establish trade routes with, and you can click on them, and there's like a continue or okay button, which you would think would send the trade route, but like it doesn't. What you actually have to do is you have to move the trader unit to that city, and then from there click a button in the unit widget in the bottom right to actually establish a trade route, and the trader I think just goes to whatever is your nearest city. You don't even choose which of your cities the trade route goes to, which doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect like the yields in the city. All it does is give you access to the luxury resources that the foreign city has, and those are all global, and you can assign which resources you want in which city, which is one of the features that I like the most about Civ 7. Like that's something that I've been asking for years, is for there to be like more domestic uses for resources and for strategic resources in particular. And Civ 7 goes a little bit more in that direction, where you have a pool of resources and you slot which city gets which resource, and each one of them provides like different bonuses or yields. I do still wish that the strategic resources were things that I could slot into cities and which could do non-military, which could provide non-military domestic bonuses. Like, I would like to see a system where like oil can be used to power military units, but you could also use it to power like a public transit system in your cities, which like, reduces pollution and improves productivity and happiness or something like that. But they don't quite do that yet. And managing the resources nowhere near as tedious as it is in Ara History Untold, which is like half a civilization game and half like one of those medieval town building games like Banished or Manor Lords, where it's all about like building production chains and accumulating resources and using those resources to craft other resources. But it creates a lot of busy work, and Civilization 7 thankfully doesn't have that busy work.
Oh man, optimizing in Manor Lords. I've seen some videos on that. No thanks. A lot of it just comes down to frustration. There's some other aspects of the UI that I think more people are critical of than me. Because for me, one of the big things has always been the quality of life of inputs and how long it takes to do things, and that's just been a problem since Civ 5. Without like nonstop, it's also a problem in Civ 6, where it just takes way more inputs to do basic things than would happen under an optimized UI. And I haven't seen much evidence that Civ 7 cares about that. But Civ 7 has the issues that everyone notices, like where are my units or how does this work? That also need to be addressed. And I think some of that will be, and I hope all of it is. But history tells me otherwise. Because when it comes to designing an efficient input UI, I don't know if Firaxis can do it. Uh, like the only example they've done in the past was Civ 4, which even that wasn't perfect, but like that team isn't there anymore, to my knowledge. And that was like that was still not great, but it was way better than the others, like far and away better than the others. But it still had problems.
Right.
So
And
I don't have too much hope, but maybe.
I mean, for me personally, like the game needs tooltips, and not only does it need tooltips that tell you like what like things do, or like what resources are required to do or build certain things, but I also want those tooltips to tell me what like the friggin' keyboard shortcuts are to like do the thing that I'm hovering over, because the game also doesn't have
Yeah.
that, and that's a
Yeah.
pretty big UI failing, because I can go into the settings and I can probably look at a list of the controls to see what all the keyboard shortcuts are, but that's like, you shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to just hover over the button, and if there is a keyboard shortcut for it, the tooltip should tell you what that shortcut is.
Now, does it let you change your keybinds?
Probably. I haven't tried that yet. And the reason for that is because I'm not using keyboard shortcuts for anything, because I don't know what any of them are.
Man, like it's hard for me to play without them. Like I would look them up if I were to try to play. Just that's how I am. But I do acknowledge that I'm in a minority when it comes to valuing that to the extent that I do.
Yeah, and
Most people, from what I gather, just don't care about quality of life, input efficiency as much. But for me, that's a pretty big sticking point, especially because I can play other games where it's not as bad.
right, and you brought up Manor Lords, and that Manor Lords has a lot of UI problems, but at least in Manor Lords' defense, that is a game that is still in early access.
Yeah. Well, plus I'm only watching other people play Manor Lords.
Oh, I play
For
Manor
games I'm
Lords.
actually playing, it's still stuff like Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, or recently I picked up Star Sector. So I'm doing a spread of games
Oh,
still.
I play Manor Lords. In fact, I've been playing a lot of Manor Lords lately, and I can for sure vouch that it has some very frustrating UI problems. The biggest one for me is that there is no control or interface for reassigning like where your livestock, like ox and horses, live or work. So if you want to like set up a stable to house an ox next to the building that the ox is going to be working at, you have to jump through a lot of hoops and like build extra temporary buildings that you can slot other oxen into, because basically whenever you assign an ox to a building, it just pulls the next ox like in an array of oxen that are available to you. So if you want a particular ox that's at the end of that array in a particular building, you have to slot all of the other oxen that are ahead of it into other buildings first, so that it's the next ox in the queue, and then you have to go back and then unassign all of the other ones, and then possibly destroy the buildings that you built in order to house them, so that they would be available for other tasks. Like that is like one of my biggest frustrations with the game right now, because that's not only a UI convenience thing, but it's also like a strategy optimization thing. Like I don't want my oxen to be traveling across the entire map, right, to pick up resources and move them around the village. I want them to be where they need to be to quickly and easily access the things that they're going to be doing. And you just can't do that in the game without jumping through a butt ton of flaming hula hoops.
Yeah. What you're describing sort of reminds me of like changing which tile your crew are fighting in FTL without mods. Mods fixed it so that it works way better. But in vanilla FTL, if you want to change which crew is standing on which tile and fighting which enemy crew, it is pretty painful because you have to like order them out of the room and then like order them back into the room in the correct sequence so that each one is standing where you want. Like it's so convoluted. And in the modders actually fix this. You can just like right click your crew where you want your crew to go in that room. You don't do it like the extra hoops of like pulling them out of the room and back into the room in sequence. And it obviously that makes trying to do it without pausing much more viable. But it's also just more of a joy to play the game when you don't have to do crap like that. Especially since that's something you do a lot in FTL if you're playing like a crew boarding run. It's like every fight you'll well maybe not every fight but like a huge percentage of your fights you'll be swapping crew and rooms with some frequency. Like that's not like a trivial thing. We're probably talking like an extra 10 plus minutes per run of just doing that.
I really do like how almost all of our episodes of this show eventually devolve into us ranting about other games as well. So I want our audience to know that we are not picking on Civilization 6 or 7. We are equal opportunity UI nitpickers.
Although too I will throw out a rave. Star Sector's UI is pretty good.
Well, there you go. The Me and Team likes things too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I do criticize UI an awful lot. So, like, there are examples of games where I actually enjoyed the experience of playing it, or I have seen enough improvement in the UI over time that I'm actually impressed. Like EU4 is a good example of that. It was dog water on release, and they've improved the quality of life so much. Like now, you've auto religious missionary conversions and stuff. Like it's still not perfect, but it is so much better
Yeah.
that it is actually, in my mind, above average as far as strategy games go in UI.
And other
And it's the same thing
frustrations.
with like mods for like Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Like the mods for Heroes of Might and Magic 3 made the UI that was okay into a good UI. It's another example of like a strong implementation. So it's
Yeah.
not like people don't know how to do it. It's just like the companies aren't prioritizing people who know how to do it into their positions.
Well, and I think it's also just it's always low priority. I think there's always an attitude of, well, we'll fix it in post release, but then there's always so many other things that need to be fixed, or they're working on expansions or DLC because every game has to be a live service now. And don't get me started about the live service qualities of Civ 7. I think that's gonna have to wait for a whole nother episode. It's not nearly as bad as I was afraid it would be, but there's still some silly things about it. But uh, so yeah, so the UI just doesn't get prioritized in a lot of these games because they need to get the base functionality working, and then now we've got to work on expansions and DLC and live service content, and we just never get around to it. So
Yeah.
for Axis, for my money, like tooltips should be one of your biggest items on your to-do list for Civ 7. And then other things too, like another thing that annoys me is like the unit widget. Like some of the common buttons are like hidden behind a toggle that you have to collapse and expand, like setting units to like alert mode, right? Where they wake up when they see an enemy unit. Like that's in an extra widget that you have to expand in order to see that button. Whereas in Civ 6, like that was, the expanding those commands was reserved for things like disbanding the unit, right? Things that you almost never do. But in Civ 7, they decided to put some really common functionality in there. So as soon as the game starts, I just expand that and leave it open for the entire game, which should definitely not be the way that works.
Or you could just hit the hotkey because they could show that to you when you mouse over it.
Yeah.
But once again, tooltips.
If only.
Right. Yeah. So again, tooltips. That for me, that's the biggest thing. Like, if you can get tooltips, I might be willing to meet you halfway. What are some things that I personally like about Civ 7? I mean, there are definitely some really cool ideas. I kind of like the way that I think I really like the way that districts work in Civ 7 compared to Civ 6. Like, I like this division that they have between urban and rural districts, where your urban districts have to be like adjacent to the city center or other districts. So you don't have those situations where you have in Civ 6 where like you have like your city center and then your like campus is like 3 tiles away with like no development at all in between, which a lot of times kind of looked unrealistic or silly. Like the urban sprawl in Civ 7 looks a lot better than the urban sprawl did in Civ 6, and so I do like that. I'm not sure that I like the fact that they took away the ability to like manage which citizens are working what tiles and things like that. Like that, there's a lot of things in Civ 7 that are really, I think they would probably call it streamlined. Some people would call it dumbed down. But there are things that I do miss, like the ability to pivot a city from being a production focused city to being more of like a culture or science focused city by just changing what tiles your citizens are working. Like you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I do like.
I do think it's useful to separate conceptually, like streamlining workers, in that like you're still making the trade-off of paying something to get the improvement. So like you can still have more complex choices there, as opposed to what you're describing with like swapping which tile citizens are working, where like now you're just losing that as a decision point entirely.
Yeah, there's two big things that I feel are lost in the meta for Civ 7 with the way that the cities work, and managing citizens is one of them. The other one is that because tile improvements, which are also called rural districts in this game, are built by cities within a city's workable radius, you cannot ever, as far as I can tell, improve tiles that are outside of a city's workable radius, even if it is within your borders. Because we don't have workers or builders anymore that can go out and build those things. It has to be done by the city. So, and this is another one of the things where the age transitions can be frustrating, because if you have like a one tile gap, right, in between the workable radius of two of your cities, and you advance from the exploration age to the modern age, and that's where all of the oil and coal happens to be, you just cannot improve those unless you go and plop another city down in that one tile strip of unclaimed land. And that is really annoying. But I do think that one of my favorite features or changes of Civ 7, and this is something that I've harped on the Civ games for quite a while now, is they have finally removed barbarians completely. So there are no groups of people in Civ 7 that are treated as subhuman animals anymore. And I really love that change. Instead of having barbarians, we have independent powers and city-states, and those independent powers can be either friendly or hostile. And the hostile ones fill the role of barbarians, but they can still be like talked to and reasoned with. You can still befriend them if you put in the work for it. It's just going to be more of an uphill climb. In fact, the very first game of Civ 7 that I played, like the first 4 independent villages that I found were all hostile, and like 2 of them were within 10 tiles of my capital, and like they wiped me out. Like completely. Like they destroyed my entire army and started pillaging my capital. And I even reloaded an earlier save to build more units to see if I could save myself, and I could not. It was just an unlucky roll, and especially for the very first game of Civ 7 that I had played, it was brutal.
Yeah, I had noticed that. I don't know if the cities, sorry, independent people spawn with them. It does seem like they can put out units either quicker or they get a pack when they spawn. So if you like you had that with the hostile, you have to start building your army immediately. And sometimes you might want to do that anyway because you don't know if there's another hostile one lurking in an unexplored corner that you're going to find, and then they're going to beeline right at you because they don't like you.
Yeah, and because of that, like we were talking earlier in the episode, how important scouting was in Civ 6. Scouting is also important in Civ 7 because you need to make sure that there are not hostile independent powers like close to you, because if you don't find them and you don't prepare for them, you are in for a really bad time. And
You
thankfully,
were in for quite the surprise.
yeah, I mean, like I said, they wiped me, and I had to abandon that game because I couldn't even get to a point where I could like load an earlier save. I didn't load early enough saves to go back and make a meaningful difference. I was dependent on like the 10
Mm.
turns of auto saves that the game saved, and like that wasn't enough. Like maybe if I could have gone back like 15 or 20 turns, right, which probably would have taken me to like the 5th turn of the game or something like that. I wasn't very far in. Maybe I could have turned things around and saved it, but with just the 10 turns of auto saves that I had, it just wasn't enough. But the scouts also have some really cool things that they can do. Some new things. So they have this new ability where they can set up lookout towers, which makes them stationary, but it expands their visibility range. So that's really cool for like after you've explored the map or enough of the map, for your immediate purposes, and you want to like station scouts like near enemy borders or whatever to watch like their unit movement and stuff like that. Like you can do that and do this lookout thing and get more visibility range to be able to see deeper into their territory, which is a really cool addition. And then there's a similar button, I think they call it search, where it uses the scout's turn and it extends their visibility, I think, by 1, similar to if they were a lookout, but it also reveals any like goody huts that are within like a certain distance but are still in the fog of war. So like it gives you, and again, talking about how important, like how competitive players would cheat and look at the maps to find where all the goody huts are. Like it almost feels like Firaxis maybe knew that was a problem, and they put in like an actual mechanic for the scouts to be able to like stop and find where the nearby goody huts are, so you can go get to them without having to cheat. So that's a really cool new
And
feature.
there's one of the mementos that gives them a +3 to that sight range. So you can have just a couple of scouts and get your whole thing explored like in the first 10 to 20 turns or something like that, if you have that on top of it. And I did
Yeah.
also
Are
see somebody
the
using an exploit with an army commander
Yep, I
where
saw
they were
that too.
popping the scout in. That was hilarious.
Right.
You're seeing just for the people that didn't see it, expanded the radius so much each time it kept adding the +3 and adding the +3 so that they were able to see distant lands like before turn like 15. And it's like, what?
Yeah, the way that it worked was you can tell the scout to do its lookout to extend its visibility range, and then use a nearby army commander to pack the scout into the army, and that does not reset the scout's visibility. And then on the next turn, you can unpack the scout from the army, which also does not reset its visibility, and do the lookout action again, which extends the visibility by 1 more
oh
tile
my
radius,
gosh.
and then pack them back into the army and repeat that every turn until eventually your one scout, like hypothetically, has visibility of the entire map. Now that's clearly, obviously, a broken mechanic and an exploit. I assume that's going to be fixed at some point, so I'm not going to be writing any strategy guides anytime soon about how that's optimal scouting, because I'm assuming it's going to be fixed.
Now,
But
speaking of Paradox games, that's the kind of interaction that feels straight out of a Paradox game. That reminds me of like how you could stack the force attack feature in Hearts of Iron and get like plus 300% attack on a single unit when each force attack's worth 20%. It's like, they probably didn't intend for this unit to have 20,000 soft attack when like a normal division would have like, less than 1,000. Probably not what they were going for. Jeez. That's funny.
and there's the event type things that pop up. I know there's one that's can sometimes pop up early, and can get an early spearman. And if you have one of those maps that has all the hostile independent powers, well, at least you got a little extra defense. Or even if you have a hostile near you, that might make the difference between you being able to survive long enough to build more to take them over,
For
as
sure.
opposed to
And
Is it
getting.
really impossible to survive when you start near hostiles? I would imagine
well, it's
if
not
you build
it's
a
not
Not
report, you could.
impossible,
impossible.
but it can be
It's just
very difficult because they produce units very quickly.
yeah, and that's all they do is produce more units,
And
and
in
you're
my
like, "Yikes."
case, the one nearby hostile independent power was manageable. The problem for me was that there were 2 of them that were really close to my capital and also really close to each other. So I had a small army. I sent it to one of the independent power villages to try to wipe it out, but the other one came up behind all my units and killed all of them,
Mm.
right? Because they had melee units that were killing my backline, archers and ranged units, which had very low melee defense. So Like,
Yeah.
okay, like a good play by the AI, I guess. I don't like it. It really felt like these two independent powers were like conspiring against me. Um, Although what probably happened is just they're assigned to go after the nearest unit, and they happened to know that my units were nearby, so they attacked them. But yeah, like I couldn't fend off both. I could fend off one or the
So
other,
if
but I
you'd
couldn't.
known about this, you probably could have, like, instead of going for one of them, instead just took up defensive position and
No,
fought
that
them
wasn't
off.
good enough either. I didn't have enough units because again, if they both came after my capital at the same time, so I had like 3 or 4 defensive units against like 7 or 8 independent power units,
I mean,
and
you've got like some kind of stuff like fortification bonus, the ability to shoot at them in situations where they struggle to shoot at you, and that
yeah,
kind of stuff, right?
you do, but
It should be
in my
doable.
particular case, it just wasn't enough, right? Like I said, if I could have gone back to an earlier save and built more units, I probably could have countered them and defended. But again, it would have been like all of my resources would have been getting poured into creating military units to defend against these two independent peoples and not doing other things, which probably would have set me back considerably.
I guess I'm asking in ignorance because, like, in Civ 6, like a deity AI could rush you with like 10 warriors or something, and you could hold it off with like 3 to 4 units of the same technology.
Yeah,
I
it,
mean,
it
maybe.
it is just harder in this. I mean, even the normal wars are harder.
But I mean, are you getting like fewer terrain modifiers? Do archers work differently than they did in Civ 6? Like, I'm
Well, it's
presuming
just
the cities aren't
I mean,
giving you shots unless you have
are
invested in that.
different, and yes, cities do not
hmm
automatically have their own bombardment anymore.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
that's true in Civ 6 already. But
But
I was
another
just
big
wondering,
thing
like,
is fortification has changed. So you don't just assign a unit to a fortify action and they are fortified for that turn. The units actually have to build a fortification, which is almost like a little temporary improvement that gets built on the map, and it takes 2 or 3 turns to do that. So you would have to
uh,
entrench yourself in advance of the enemy approach in order to benefit from the fortification bonuses. Otherwise, they're just attacking you while you're trying to build the fortifications, and I don't even that might even give you a combat penalty. I'm not even sure.
yeah, well, fortification building up over turns is like Civ 4 and 5.
Right, but the thing
Civ
here
6 was a
is
bit exceptional in that you could get it instantaneously.
right, but the thing here is even in Civ 4 and 5, on the turn that you do the fortify action, you have a small fortification defensive bonus. From what I can tell
I
in
don't think
Civ
that's
7,
true in 4. Maybe it is in 5. I'm pretty sure in 4 you don't.
okay, well, in any case, in Civ 7, it takes several turns before the fortifications are constructed, and I don't think you get any defensive bonus until that construction is completed.
Hmm, okay,
So
so you would have to set up for it,
yeah, you would have to know that they're
basically.
coming, and you would have to put your units on rough terrain in defensible positions and set up the fortifications in advance, and then make sure that you're also in position where like your ranged units can shoot over your frontline melee units that are in the fortifications and all that stuff too. But yeah, it would be manageable. It's doable. It just in my
You just have
particular
to know about it.
yeah, in my particular circumstances and with the save scumming options that I had available, it was a lost cause. I will say also that I do like in principle the way that changing civilizations works. I am a little bit surprised by how it was implemented in Civ 7 because I kind of suspected that because Civ always had a focus on leaders, that they would have a system where like maybe you would have one Civ over the course of the entire game and then would change leaders over the course of the game, but they did the opposite, which is the same way that that humankind does it. And I do think that system works very well. And one of the big benefits of that is that they don't have to try to balance particular civilizations like for the entire game. Each civilization is balanced for the age that they play in, and from what I've seen, it looks like they all have pretty interesting abilities. Like none of them seemed like just total garbage. The way that some civs or leaders in Civ 6 or Civ 5 might have looked, like especially if you're thinking about like, oh, they don't have any bonuses until the late game, so I'm not going to have any advantages early game, and that's going to set me back. Like that's just not really an issue as much anymore. Like every civ is good in the age in which it is available. And that is one of the biggest strengths of this new age system.
Yeah, it's the fact that there's almost no bad civ to play. I think they're mostly balanced. There's probably a little bit of some are a little bit better and some are a little bit worse,
Yeah, I've seen videos saying like I think like the Maya are like overpowered and
they are
one or two others.
I have seen enough people playing it to know Maya. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Maya's been picked up on.
But of course that's going to happen, right? Like no, the game is not going to be perfectly balanced at release.
It's not going to stay perfectly balanced. Yeah,
and it's not going to stay perfectly balanced.
No.
And I even right, so the changing the civilizations or cultures over the course of the game, like that's also what Humankind did, right? But I think Civ 7 also kind of improves a little bit over Humankind's system, because one of the criticisms of Humankind was that you could pick, when you go into a new era, you can pick any culture, right? Like there's no relationships between them. You can go from being, the ancient Chinese to being the Romans to being Americans, right? But in Civ 7, they actually set up the system so that there are relationships between the different civilizations and the different leaders, so that playing as one civilization in the Antiquity Age unlocks a subset of civilization options for the Exploration Age, and then whichever civilization you choose for the Exploration Age unlocks a subset of options for the Modern Age, and then also which leader you selected will unlock different civilizations for each of the ages. And then on top of that, if you meet certain in-game goals or complete certain objectives, you unlock other civilization options for future ages. So they're more, the transitions between civilizations makes a little bit more historical and thematic sense than those transitions did in Humankind. And I think it's really cool that they took that criticism of Humankind and they came up with something that addresses it in I think a pretty good way.
Yeah, because some of your unlocks are also that particular game's map dependent. Like, I was watching one person playing who wanted to have, I forget which one is the modern era China, or but you need to have 3T resources. So that was something they had to scramble to do as the age was ending to make sure they had the 3T resources because they wanted to transition to them. And we knew about the horses and the Mongols. So yeah, I like that sometimes it really is. Well, I wanted to do this, but this time the game didn't give me enough of the resources to get to that civ, so I'm going to have to pivot and play somebody else. That's more interesting choices.
Right, and so the civilizations that you play like feel more emergent in terms of how the game has gone in the past. It doesn't have that arbitrariness that Humankind had, and that is very much appreciated. And there's a strategy then as well, right? Because if you pick a particular leader and you pick a particular civilization, you're going to have access to specific civilizations later in the game. But if you have like a particular, meta long-term strategy that you want to go for, then you have to meet those specific objectives in order to unlock the other civilizations that you might want to choose, right? So if you want to go from like, Greece to medieval Chinese or something like that, then you either have to have the leader that unlocks, the medieval Chinese, or you would have to complete whatever objective unlocks the medieval Chinese. Otherwise, you're stuck becoming, like the Normans or someone like that. So that's something to plan and strategize for, like when you're setting up the game and thinking about like what leader and civilization you want to pick at the beginning.
And you have enough other options that if the way the game goes that you wanted to play a more builder empire thing, but you got that one neighbor who's annoying and wants to fight all the time, then you can go into something that's stronger military wise. And then maybe you beat them down and then you can do your final age, you can go back to your builder. So you get to go along with the flow of the game, both in terms of the map and your other opponents, I think a lot better.
Yep. So that is, I think, for sure one of the strengths of this new system. So I wanted to make sure that I talk about good things and that the whole episode isn't just complaining about the game. Probably should have led with some more of the good things, but I think all three of us are just the kind of people where we like to vent our annoyances first, and then we'll circle back around and talk about things we like.
Flip tables first. Say, but actually, this part's really good later.
Yeah,
Stand
well,
on the legs of the people.
and for me, I mean, I've had a lot of people like tell me that it's like a personality flaw that I usually jump immediately to the things that I don't like about something. But like from my perspective,
Wow.
it's about like wanting things to be better than they are. Right? Like I it's like my optimistic, idealistic, glass half full approach isn't that, oh, this thing is bad, I don't like it. It's, well, these are the ways that I think it could have been better. Right?
We can see where things could improve, and we wish it was there. So we want to say, we want to draw the attention to, could you improve this? And then we're going to give you the compliments for the things we like. But there's some things that really need attention first, as much as we love you.
Yeah, and it I know it comes off as like feeling, like complainy and nitpicky, but I want to assure all our listeners that, like, if for me in my head, it's coming from a good place of wanting to provide constructive criticism, right? And that the highest priority is always to fix the things that are broken so that, they get fixed, and then acknowledge the things that work very well. And that's kind of just the way that my mind operates. But anyway, I think we're getting close to the 90-minute mark. So if the two of you don't have anything else in particular you want to say, maybe it's about time to wrap this up and save other things for a later recording.
Yeah, that's about all I've got right now for my impressions of things.
Phil, any last minute impressions or criticisms?
You are rants.
No. Let's save future rants for future.
Well, then this has been episode 443 of PolyCast. I'm Makalua. With us, Mega Bears fan.
Okay, I think I found a way to fix the beeping, which is I disabled push to talk in Discord, but left it enabled in OBS. So I hope it sounded a lot better for the second, like, half or 2/3 of the stream.
And the me and team.
I will never take you out of the age of antiquity.
And this is where Canis would usually give us the copyright stuff, but I forgot
Yeah,
all of it. So what was
I
it?
certainly don't have that committed to me.
Civ 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 audio copyright Firaxis and Take-Two Interactive or something like that.
And all of our talking other things are copyright polycast.net.
Yeah.
Put a proper one in later.
We'll fix it in post. All right. Cheers, everyone.